Hey folks, Andrew Packer here and welcome to Trading Tips. Today's video we're going to take a look at the Cybertruck launch for Tesla Motors and look at whether or not shares are a buy. So Tesla Motors CEO Elon Musk unveiled the Cybertruck fairly recently, and rather unusual looking concept vehicle that's expected to be in production by the end of next year. Now, of course, the launch didn't exactly go particularly well. During a show-off of sort of the so-called shatterproof windows, Elon Musk actually managed to break them. And he later explained that this happened because first they were slamming hammers into the side of the car to demonstrate how strong it was, and by having the windows up later, they'd already sort of been damaged from that previous impact. And if he'd done it the other way around, the windows would have been okay and they would have stayed shatterproof. From an engineering perspective, that sort of makes sense. So it didn't exactly get kind of the best first impression, and that can happen sometimes with a product that ends up doing pretty well. But a lot of people also just criticize the design of the Cybertruck, which has a very angular sort of look to it, that a lot of people just thought, this is a little too futuristic. This is like an El Camino and a DeLorean had a love child, and it didn't really help that you had all of this fancy kind of chrome look to it. But this is an all-electric vehicle, and it's one that comes with a couple of different engine varieties. Now, the cheapest model is going to come in at about $39,000, and it's going to have a range of about 250 miles. Now, as far as electric trucks go, that's pretty good. It's also got this hauling ability to it, which if you're actually using a truck for the purposes of hauling, which not every truck owner necessarily does on a regular basis, this is going to do very well. A 250-mile range at a construction site where you have to haul goods around a small little area every day, that's going to be kind of a pretty good thing. But for comparison's sake, ran the numbers on a comparative truck, the Ford F150, and this actually comes in at about $28,900. So that's almost $10,000 cheaper per unit just to start with. And of course, the range on that doesn't really matter because this is a car that still runs on gasoline, but they probably get about 250, 300 miles to the tank of gas. And it's a lot easier still to get gas than it is to stop and have to charge up an electric vehicle, which takes a lot longer than just putting a couple of bucks in at the pump. So just for comparison's sake, it is a little more, but there are some values to it. So where does that stand with Tesla Motor shares? Despite kind of some of the problems that happened during the launch and showing off the vehicle, the fact of the matter is Tesla Motor shares are actually doing very well. They've had a very good few months, and they actually jumped as this came out and following their previous earnings where they've been beating expectations. The company's doing a lot better operationally than it was a year ago, and even a few months ago when I did the last video on Tesla Motors and some of the problems there. Now, of course, the company isn't entirely out of the woods yet, and the company is still unprofitable. So there are a lot of conflicting sort of issues here, not to mention, the larger-than-life CEO Elon Musk, who the week after unveiling the Cybertruck ended up in a civil trial defending himself for statements he made on Twitter, kind of an unrelated way. He's still got a lot of these distracting issues going on, and, while a lot of people kind of see him as telling it like it is and sort of the entrepreneurial version of President Trump, kind of in his earlier days, saying these outrageous things, he is bringing some of these big innovations to the table. So that said, looking at where Tesla shares have gotten up to into the 330 range, coming up from a low of about 170, 180 earlier in the year, I would probably say that shares probably need a little bit more time to digest and to make sure that kind of the underlying car business, as opposed to the new truck, kind of continue to improve in terms of their operation, in terms of their production, and just kind of in terms of getting the company to profitability, because it's still not quite there yet. And of course, the one other factor that we want to look at when we're looking at a company is where it stands relative to its industry. Now, right now, Tesla Motors has a market cap of over 60 billion. Market cap is just the number of shares the company has times the share price. Gives you an idea of what it would take to sort of buy the entire company on the open market if you could get every share. Now, for a comparison with Ford again, now Ford only has a market cap of about 30 billion right now. That's about half the market cap of Tesla, just using kind of round numbers here. But Ford actually sells a lot more vehicles than Tesla does. It already has an existing truck line, and the F-150 is a very, popular vehicle. And at a price, $10,000 cheaper than the Cybertruck, it's not necessarily going to pull a lot of demand necessarily away from people with lower incomes who need a truck. They're going to probably still going to be continuing to use a product like this. So looking at that, and just the fact that you have a company that's unprofitable, but it's really surged a lot higher in the last few months, and its valuation's gotten so high relative to the industry when it's not even necessarily, a profitable company yet, I would just look at shares of Tesla as sort of a hold for now. Obviously, in the past, I've been a little more pessimistic, but because of the improving production issues, and because there is some pretty good potential here with the Cybertruck, I don't necessarily think it's going to have kind of the big downward movement that I was looking at the last time we were taking a good look at Tesla here. I would say shares can probably get back into the 270, 280 range, and that's probably where you're going to want to look to buy them if you aren't already a shareholder. So we'll just put that down there. Just 275 on average. That's a place where you're going to get the advantages of the company's improving productivity on its existing line of electric cars, where you're going to get whatever advantage comes from the Cybertruck. But just also recognize that, this isn't going to move in a straight line. Just because shares have been going up, they're probably going to get back into this buying range, pretty quickly if the company has another tough quarter, if it looks like sales aren't necessarily where they need to be for either the cars or the truck. Now, a lot of people are pointing out that, hey, Tesla already got, hundreds of thousands of pre-orders for the truck. But here's kind of the little secret here that's a little dirty. It's a $100 deposit to simply say that, yeah, you've pre-ordered your Tesla truck, but it's also refundable. So if you decide later, hey, I can't actually afford this, I can't afford to finance this, I could afford to finance a cheaper car like the Ford F150, cheaper truck, and get the same functionality I need. A lot of people could end up canceling those. But even if they don't cancel those, going from zero to, having to produce 200,000 of these, that's a process that's going to take years. It's going to be a lot like the original Tesla electric car rollout problems that they had a few years back when they were just getting the original models out. A lot of people had to wait months, and a few people had to wait even longer than that, and some people got frustrated along the way. So even though there's a big number of pre-orders right now, that's not necessarily going to translate into final sales. So I would take that with a bit of a grain of salt. And that's also why we're just looking at targeting shares on a pullback to 275. I think that's a much more reasonable price. And even though the valuation will still exceed that of a more traditional car company, if they're continuing to innovate and they're continuing to improve and they're continuing to go into new areas where they can grab market share, it's a bit of a different day for Tesla Motors. So there's definitely some long-term optimism there, but I still think, with a volatile company like this, we're going to get much better buying prices in the weeks ahead. So that's where we're at, looking at the Cybertruck launch with Tesla Motors. So that'll wrap things up for this video on trading tips. Until next time, I'm Andrew Packer, wishing you good trading and good financial health.